and the Emory University Board of Visitors. Mr. Morrison earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Science from South Carolina State University and holds a Master's degree in Science from Northwestern University. Please welcome Mr. Gregory B. Morrison.
I'm usually told I'm loud enough, but for the purpose of this auditorium, I guess I'll stick with it.
And because we're live streaming, and I forgot to say hello to the alumni who are joining us online. We appreciate you being with us as well. Okay, so the way this is going to be structured today is several of our alumni submitted questions in advance. And Mr. Morrison and I are going to go through those questions. We've accepted questions from the audience. If any of you have questions, you can submit it. If we have time, we'll get to it. And we're also going to accept questions from the alumni who are on the live feed. And Sabrina Alvin is monitoring that for us today. All right.
So you don't have it?
All right, Ernie, I didn't realize that I was the only thing on the agenda today. Well, thank you for inviting me. And so what I thought I would do is just share a little bit about the board structure. You heard a little bit about me, kind of what's happening at the university, kind of the state of the university, some of our strategic goals, priorities, and then the topic of the day, which is the presidential search. And then I'll take any questions that you have, or any questions that folks here in the audience has. I don't know how much you know about the board and the board structure. We have 30 trustees who are on the board. There are no term limits associated with trustee tenure, and so the oldest serving member is Dr. Aldridge, and the youngest serving member is Al Reed, who was elected in October, so 2 months or a month at this point. There are 6 committees, building and ground committees, finance and audit, governance and comp, academic affairs, student affairs, and institutional advancement. Richard Holmes chairs the buildings and ground. Leonard Walker chairs finance and audit. Errol Taylor chairs governance and comp. Dr. Aldridge chairs academic affairs. Michael Melton chairs student affairs, and Ingrid Saunders-Jones chairs institutional advancement. I did forget to mention there are 2 ex officio members on the board from the National Alumni Association. That's the president of the National Alumni Association, and then I believe an elected member by the Alumni Association who is a board trustee representative. And they serve on the board. They're ex officios, which means that as long as they serve in the capacity, their officer capacity at the National Alumni Association, they serve on the board. The trustees have 3-year terms. They're set in classes, and so that every year some subset of the trustees' class will expire, and either they will be stand for re-election or someone will be added to replace them. Like most nonprofits and like all universities, the work of the board is done in committees. So We have 3 board meetings. We have an annual meeting, which is in October. We have a winter meeting in February, and we have a spring meeting in May. And most of those meetings are associated with reports from the various committees. The committees will meet multiple times between meetings of the board, depending on the work that they have to do. For example, the Finance and Audit Committee pretty much meets every month, just because of the nature of their oversight. As a board, sometimes people will reach out to a trustee because they have the contact information, and will reach out with usually with a request that they don't like something that the administration has done and want them to change. That's not the role of the board. The role of the board is governance and policy. We set policy, and we are responsible for the oversight and the adherence to that policy, but the administration is responsible for running the university. The board hires one person, which is the president, who is the chief executive officer. We appoint the provost, and we appoint the CFO, and we appoint the chief operating officer. So the senior staff members from an officer position are appointed by the board, but they're not employed. They're not hired by the board. But the board only hires one individual, which is the president, and then the president's responsible for working with the staff and the faculty to educate the kids who attend the university. So that's kind of the overview of the structure. We have 3 officers, the chair, whose role I have, the vice chair, that's Leonard Walker, and the secretary, and that's Dr. Dolores Aldrich. Those are the only 3 board officer roles that we have. A little bit about me. Many mentioned that I joined the board in 2004, and that's true. I served for a number of years as the chair of the Governance and Compensation Committee, and I vice chaired the Audit Committee for an equal number of years. And then under Alex, I was the vice chair of the board, and when Alex Cummings stepped down from the chair's role to go run for president of Liberia, I became the chair. So that's kind of my history with being on the board. So what do we do? What do we look at from a trustee perspective? There are a number of what we call key performance measures that we watch. Things like enrollment, the growth of enrollment, and the state of the university actually is in pretty good shape. Certainly the best financial shape since I've been on the board. Enrollment has increased from roughly 3,200 in 2013 to last year 38, 21, and I think this year was a little over 3,900. Not all good news, though. Our graduate school enrollment has not increased, and so if you look at graduate school between the master's only program and the doctoral program enrollment is about the same as it was in 2013. I think there's only one student difference. On the master's program, we've lost a number. That enrollment is down, and it certainly has caught the attention of the board, and we are looking for ways and asking the administration to look at changes that will put more attention on our graduate school. We are a research university, and if we're going to stay a research university, we obviously need to have graduate students. Enrollment is one of those measures that we look at. And then, as you might guess, financial stability is another key performance measure. And there are lots of metrics that we track and look at, and the Finance and Audit Committee is intimately involved in all of them. But at a high level, things that the board generally pays attention and looks at includes our Moody's rating. So Moody's is the rating agency that rates our debt. They recently revised their rating from stable to positive and reaffirmed our debt rating. It's one grade below investment grade, and so we're working really hard to move it up to investment grade. Cash flow is another important metric that we watch because it talks to our ability, our liquidity ability, the ability to pay the bills that the university has. And we have the best liquidity we've ever had since I've been on the board, and our debt structures are debt's down. So things like from 13 to 17, our debt declined from 39 million to 25 million. Our operating income increased from a negative 300,000 to a little over 7 million. And then our operating cash flow went from 8.5 million to 16.5 million over that same time. So we are financially, we are in a pretty good shape. We have an endowment. The endowment is on made up of market-based assets. So I don't know what the exact size of the endowment is, but at the end of the second quarter, it was sitting around 70 million compared to 60 million at the same time the year before. Most universities have endowments in the $20 to $30 million range. Some have a lot higher. Spelman has a lot higher, and Morehouse is higher, Howard's higher, Hampton's higher. One of our initiatives is to improve or increase the size of our endowment, and that will come with a capital campaign at some point. And then students, another metric that kind of shapes what the state of the university is what we call our student excellent indicators. And so what that is the SAT scores of our admitted freshmen, and they have gone up from around 914 this year. The admitted freshman class had an average SAT score of 1036. To give you a reference point, Spelman is 1143 and Morehouse is 1055. And then the other student excellent indicator that we look at and track is the proportion of graduating freshmen that graduated in the top quarter, the top 25% of their class. And this year it was 37% versus 26 in 2013. And again, 80 reference, Spelman is 53 and Morehouse is 36. So the academic readiness of the students that we have has increased. So retention is up, enrollment's up, So overall, I think that we have, as I mentioned, the university is in a pretty good spot. Do we have work to do? Absolutely. We have a number of initiatives that we are focused on. One of the things that we are in the process of doing is a refresh of our strategic plan. So we do a 5-year strategic plan every 5 years to kind of lay out what are the aspirational goals that we want to set for the university to accomplish over the next 5 years. And we want to be a transformative educational institution, and we clearly want to have impact-driven research because we are a research university. And the building of the strategic plan starts with the faculty, involves the staff, involves the board, and then it's finalized. And there are 6 goals that are under development now. The plan is still in its formative draft stages, but the 6 goals are academic planning, enrollment and student success, research and creative activity, institutional effectiveness, facilities, technology, entrepreneurship and real estate, and then marketing, branding, and funding. So those are the 6 areas that we are identifying individual action items that we want to address. And you could probably guess what they are. They're not it wouldn't be that hard. Certainly under marketing, branding, and funding, it includes increased visibility and brand value and fundraising and elevating the university's national profile. Under institutional effectiveness, we want to make sure that we are student-centered, continue to enhance our financial soundness, and expand our endowment, and then research, more research, adding additional grad students. So academic planning, new programs, online, hybrid learning, continuing ed, continued focus on stackable credentials, kind of fit within all those categories. So the plan is draft at this point. It will get presented to the board in February, if not February, March. The board will have a retreat where we will go through it, make any final tweaks, and then probably in May at the spring board meeting we'll approve the plan. So that's kind of the timeline related to it. To summarize, what I will say, and it's a big document. It's over 100 pages the way it is, the way it's laid out now. It needs to be streamlined, and there will be some edited versions that will be public. Actually, the whole thing will be public. Anybody who wants to read it will be able to read it once it's finalized. But things that you can expect to see in it are things around the faculty, around research, around deferred maintenance, around student financial support, student career assistance, real estate, our Moody's investment rating, and the endowment. More to come on that, but you'll be able to see it and in all of its detail. On the presidential search, we are assembling a group of diverse folks that will have the skill and the intent, the trust, and the credibility to, among all of the Clark Atlanta University constituents groups, to identify not the candidate, but a group of semi-finalists. The selection committee is not picking the next president of Clark Atlanta University. That ultimately is the board's responsibility. But they will go through the process of identifying the candidates through their applicants, screening and interviewing, and then recommending that short list of candidates to the board for consideration. And we're targeting, hopefully, to have the next president identified by May of next year, but we're not going to rush the process. There are 14 members on the selection committee. Trustee Leonard Walker and Trustee Stephanie Russell are co-chairing the selection committee. Then I think there are 5 other trustees that are on it. The student SGA presidents will be part of the selection committee. The faculty assembly will send 2 representatives. The staff assembly will have a person, and Dr. Calvin Briggs, who has been with the National Alumni Association, will also be part of the selection committee. I won't miss the opportunity to say that Devin White and I start naming names and Carla Cooper are on the board of trustees, so they will be, like the rest of us, involved in the vetting, the deliberation of the semifinalists to identify a finalist candidate that can be invited back to the university for what will likely be 3 or 4 days of interviewing, town hall meetings, presentations. It's intended, at least at this point, it's intended to be a fairly comprehensive process of vetting that person at the university before an offer is made to the person. So it's not the person coming with an offer in hand. It's the person coming with the intent to, for the board and the selection committee to continue to select feedback from the Alumni Association, from the faculty assembly as a whole, from the student body, from the government agencies in Atlanta, to include the chamber, some corporate donors, maybe probably even the mayor's office. The intent is that we want to have a real comprehensive selection process that is inclusive of all of the major constituencies and the stakeholders of the university. And so it's intended to be transparent, and it's intended to be inclusive. And there are going to be multiple ways for everyone. The alumni, part of the process will be the selection committee meeting with various alumni chapters to hear firsthand from the chapters what are the characteristics that are needed of the next president. I can't speak for the search committee because I'm not on the search committee, but I've had fairly extensive conversations with the 2 chairs, and they are committed to reaching out to as many of the Alumni Association chapters individually to engage them in those listening sessions on the characteristics that are required. Stakeholders will be able to provide information through those listening sessions directly to the search committee. There will be an online survey that's posted on the website. They're working on putting a search page on the CAU portal, and there will be a survey there to solicit individuals, anybody who wants to provide input on the qualities, the credentials, and the experiences that a new president should possess. And then the other way is to nominate either candidates that you know or sources of candidates that you know that the search committee through the search form are to solicit. And believe it or not, a number of those recommendations have already come in. And then lastly, I would encourage all of you, when you're invited, and you will be invited to attend events that will occur on campus, to visit with the finalists and provide your own input, feedback back to the selection committee, and it will be they, after that final review process, who will then make the recommendation to the board, and the board will then decide whether he or she is going to be the next president of the university. So this search process will be a little different than the others, at least the last two. Well, it was the last one because Dr. Brown, there wasn't a search process for him. But it really is intended to be an inclusive process and a transparent process. It's not going to be a perfect process, and ultimately whoever is selected may not be the perfect candidate, meaning that the perfect candidate to the person who is saying that he or she isn't the perfect candidate. But it will be the collective view of all the constituents who will go into making that decision. So I'm excited, I'm hopeful, and I expect that we will have lots of interested parties who will raise their hands to submit their application. I will say this, that the search process is confidential. It's intended to be confidential. Members of the search committee will have to sign confidentiality statements and non-disclosure statements. And the reason for that is national profile candidates do not want their name identified before it's time. And so none of the names of the candidates, of the applicants, will come out of the search committee, not even to me. As a chair, I'm not sitting on the search committee. They're not coming to me, they're not coming to any board member. Some board members might be frustrated with that, but it has to be a really classified or confidential process until we get to the semifinalists. The names of the semifinalists will only be shared with the board. They won't come outside of the board. The finalists obviously will, because he or she will be on campus to go through that last series of hurdles and interviews. And if for some reason they are unsuccessful, then there will be a set of semifinalists, and we'll end up with asking the next person that's on the list, if you will, to go through that same process of the campus interviews. So that's the long and short of it. The committee is in the process of being finalized. I did omit one other person that we hope to have on the committee, which is why I haven't sent the note out yet finalizing the committee, and that is we're in discussions with the former HBCU president to also join our search committee. That person is not a former Clark or CAU president, but the person is a former HBCU president. So that's where we are on the search. And hopefully I may have hit on a number of the questions that you had, but I'm open to take questions at this point.
All right, thank you. I was trying to keep up with you from the questions that were submitted. And then I tried to organize them as they came in by topic. So we'll probably end up all over the place though. You talked about the trustees as it relates to governance and whatnot. Can you tell me if you said this or not, because you said a lot. Can the chairperson provide the number of years the present Board of Trustee members have served on the board? You did tell us.
I didn't go through, we have 30 trustees. I didn't go through the tenure of every trustee. We have a couple, Dr. Aldrich has been on the board since 1988. So she is clearly the longest serving trustee. And we have a number who have been in the 10 to 15 year range, and then the rest less than 10 years. So if I was, it's not quite a bell curve, but it's probably, if I looked at the average age of the average tenure of the board, and I'm guessing, and somebody will go do math and prove me wrong, but I'm going to guess it's probably around 12 years.
Okay. Now you did mention that Carla Cooper is the alumni representative on the board, but this person's question asked, who is the alumni rep and how do we contact that person?
That's the Alumni National Association question. So, as I said, Devin White, who's the president of the National Association, is one of the alumni reps, and then my understanding that the National Alumni Association has an election process to select the other board member, the representative to the board. So you would contact them through the National Alumni Association.
And you did mention that there's no term limit for trustees.
Correct.
So no one has served beyond their term. What plans have been put in place to ensure CAU administrators are not embezzling school funds?
Having chaired the audit committee, I would tell you that would be extremely hard to do, if not impossible on a significant scale. Would it be possible for somebody to steal, some money, 10 grand, 20 grand, 15 grand, 8 grand, 5 grand? Probably, because people work in the university and they're, like any institution, there's a level of trust around payment of bills, processes, credit cards. So could somebody do that? Yes. Could somebody embezzle a significant amount of money from the university? Highly improbable. There are many processes and controls in place. They have to be in place because we go through an annual audit every year of both the university and the endowment and the president's office, and the audit and the finance and audit committee is intimately involved with the balance sheets, the income statements, and have to be because because of completing our audits. There are two subcommittees within the Finance and Audit Committee. There is an audit subcommittee, and there is a investment subcommittee. So the investment subcommittee focuses on the endowment and the management of the assets in the endowment, and then the audit committee focuses on internal audit processes, procedures, and our financial audit.
Along those lines, is there any particular reason why we don't take cards at our athletic events?
You're asking me an administrative question, and I can't answer that. You'd have to ask the president, the CFO, somebody who would know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I don't know.
This is related to public relations. Who is the team or individual responsible for marketing CAU's mission and handling of crisis communications to the media?
Yeah, we have the office is split. The institutional advancement office used to be communications and advancement, and an organizational change was made earlier this year to split out the advancement from the communications. Some of you may have known Donna Brock, who was in charge of communications. She left the university, and there is a vacancy that is open now that the university is trying to fill. I don't know where they are in filling the vacancy, but it's a role that they're staffing up. And part of the organizational change was to create an additional role around branding and marketing, which is different from communications. And so in that new department, there's staff being added to focus on marketing, to focus on branding, eventually to focus on external affairs, I believe is the plan, as well as communications, which is internal communications and external communications.
You mentioned branding, and I saw a question in here that someone from the audience had already submitted, asking why are we marketing 30 years of CAU's existence as opposed to combined 153, or however many number of years it is, for AU, Clark College, and CAU?
Yeah, so I will definitely get myself in trouble with this question. The short answer is it's the 30th anniversary of Atlanta University and Clark College coming together. That's the real short answer. There was nothing. There really isn't anything more to it than that. To acknowledge the consolidation and to use that as an opportunity to bring awareness to the institution, to raise awareness to the institution, and more importantly, to engage alumni, but not just alumni, but use it as an opportunity to fundraise on behalf of the university. So one of the challenges that we have, and it's not unique to us, it's every private university has this challenge, and that is student affordability. What is unique to us, 60% of our students come from households that make less than $48,000. Only 23% of our students come from households that make more than $75,000. So we are in we have a very unique challenge around student affordability, and so there is something called it's industry-wide. It's called net price tuition. So it's the net tuition. So that's tuition and fees less grants, institutional scholarships, whatever is basically what you end up paying on a net basis. And our capacity to give scholarships affects net tuition. And so that's why there is an increased focus on scholarships, student scholarships, to help drive down the cost of the education at Clark Atlanta University for our students, because the other unfortunate thing is that the percentage of students of Pell Grants has gone down because of what's happening in DC. And so we have to help make up the gap for our students. And then you might ask, why HBCUs? Well, I think all of us could answer that question pretty easily, but not everybody is aware of the value experience that HBCUs provide. Only 22% of Black youth have BS degrees or undergraduate degrees and higher, and that's compared with 41% of white and 61% of Asians. And so, if you look at members of Congress who are Black, 40% of them have HBCU educations. If you look at the number of engineers, 40% of Black engineers were matriculated from HBCUs. 50% of the professors at predominantly white institutions come from HBCUs. 50% of lawyers have HBCUs, and 80% of the judges have an HBCU background. So that's why we need HBCUs, because they are the ones who are, we are the ones who are educating our youth, and we need to continue to do it. And so the one ask I have of all of you is think about scholarships, and do whatever you can to provide scholarships to students, and you can restrict your donations to individuals so that they only go to scholarship, that none of it is used for administrative purposes. I don't really care, because it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's that every dollar that you help a student is important. You would not believe the number of students who struggle to be financially able to enroll because they are $500 short, or they are $600 short, or they are $1,000 short. And so, all of you who've gone to school, you know what the price of books are. So if you want to do something, do that. Yeah, I don't think that we've forgotten about Clark College or the Atlanta University. It really, as I said, the reason that it was focused on Clark Atlanta University, because it's the 30th anniversary of the consolidation. That's really all it is. And it was intended to be an opportunity to basically raise money for the university. And I don't think the president, in any of the things that he's done to talk about it, has ignored Clark College or AU. I've been in some of the settings where he was talking about the 30th anniversary, and he starts with the history of Clark College and the history of the AU, of the Atlanta University.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Hold on, excuse me. Write it down and pass it to me, because we have some that have already been turned in. That's what we announced in advance. Okay, this is regarding presidential search.
Mm-hmm.
As an HBCU with a Methodist background, does CAU ascribe to a moral compass? If so, please explain and indicate how the Board of Trustees will address the moral compass with the candidate for president of CAU.
Yes. Well, we have the bishop who's on our board of trustees, when the bishop doesn't attend been on the board for an extended period of time. And she will be, as a representative of the bishop, will be involved in the deliberations of our ultimate candidate and of the finalists. And as you can imagine, she, and along with others who are on the board, acknowledge, embrace, and look for that characteristic of the candidate. And so, once we get to the semifinalists, we'll be doing background checks, vetting them, unfortunately, sometimes you can discover the character of a person in a background check, but generally you discover the character of a person in interactions and conversations, and those attributes matter. They are important.
What is CAU's endowment today, and how much has it grown over the past 8 years?
Well, I mentioned that earlier. So at the end of June, I think at the end of the quarter, it was roughly 70 million, and that's up from 60 million at the same time last year.
Do you publicize the minutes from your Board of Trustee meetings, and where can alumni get access to those?
Yes, we have minutes from every meeting. They are published. They aren't public. I don't think they're public. A good question. I don't know the answer to that. There's no reason they can't be shared, but they're not public today. We don't post them on the website.
Okay. This goes back to the alumni rep on the Board of Trustees. This person wants to know, will the representative have any restrictions or limitations imposed? I know you said, confidentiality is important. But outside of who the candidate is, do they have any restrictions on what they can say?
They won't be able to say anything.
Okay. Did you, as the board chair, decide who the alumni representative would be for the search? If yes, how and why was he chosen?
Yes. So I asked the president of Alumni Association to appoint Dr. Calvin Briggs to the for the search, and the reason that I did is trying to balance the composition of the search committee to have the right balance, if you will, of folks from the academy. Dr. Aldridge would normally have served on the search, but elected not to do so. And it's important for the faculty constituency to have confidence that the academy is adequately represented on the search. And Dr. Briggs sat on the board as Marshall Taggart's representative. So he's familiar with the board was familiar with him, and he comes from the academy, and he's alumni of the university. So there were a lot of boxes that we could check with that. But as I said earlier, the search committee is not picking the candidate. The candidate will be picked by the board, and on the board we have the 2 alumni representatives who will be intimately involved in the deliberations and the review and the vetting and ultimately the final selection of the next president of our university. And so the search committee cannot incorporate everybody. It's just not feasible to have a search committee that wide. But it is feasible to get as much of the constituency, a good cross balance, if you will, to help So we have a lot of deferred maintenance. I mentioned that part of the strategy is to attack some of the deferred maintenance, and we have been. We invested $4.5 million this year on deferred maintenance on buildings. We did a similar amount last year. We're going to continue to try to address and bring down the deferred maintenance. It's a lot, so it's not going to happen overnight. Buildings that are needed for the delivery of our education for our students, we bring online. Things that we don't need. Those buildings will stay offline until such time that we need to do something or address them. Ultimately, that's the administration's call in terms of how the buildings are handled, our job at the board is to try to identify the funding to address deferred maintenance.
Okay. I had a couple of questions from the feed, and if someone could give me, there's a piece of paper that someone gave me in the audience that I left laying over there. It has 3 questions about athletics on it. I left the questions, a piece of paper over there that has questions on it about athletics, if you can hand that to me. This is from the feed? No. Okay. I don't know if you said so much, you just say if you said it already. What's the process for updating the bylaws for the Board of Trustees, and are those accessible to the alumni? I don't know if the bylaws are on the website. They could be. They aren't. Okay, they're not. The bylaws aren't. There's nothing classified about the bylaws. They can be shared. You can get them from the administration. The process of which bylaws are the way that bylaws are changed is that the Governance and Comp Committee reviews any proposed changes to the bylaws. It has to go through their committee first. They deliberate on it, they discuss them, and then if there are bylaw changes that need to be made, they will make the proposal to the full board for those changes to the bylaws. We typically do not vote on bylaw changes at a board meeting. When they are introduced, then they're there for review, and then at the subsequent meeting, if a motion is made, there's discussion, and then that's when they would be approved. Most of the bylaw changes, bylaws, we don't change the bylaws that often, and there needs to be a good reason for changing them, and so there's a fair amount of deliberation that goes into the process of making bylaw changes. Okay. So alumni should ask the alumni reps for that, or should they go through the board?
You can ask the alumni reps. They have them. They have access to them.
Okay. Okay. This person's question says, your predecessor came to meet with the Atlanta Chapter and the Boosters Association and informed the university that informed alumni that university does not have funds to support a competent athletic program. For example, university does not provide the full complement of athletic scholarships that are required by the NCAA. Further, the alumni have been told that many of our competitors have significantly more athletic grants than CAU. We would like to know if the plans are to continue our athletic programs now and in the future with these deficits, or if there's a strategic plan for how the athletic program will be funded.
So I'm not personally aware of any deficit spending or deficit with respect to our athletic program. There may be, I'm just not personally aware of it. Athletic funding, like all funding in the university, is handled by the administration. And I can only speak for myself that the president, this president, or Dr. Brown didn't make didn't report to either me or the appropriate finance and audit committees where it would go of challenges vis-a-vis funding or athletic funding. Now, having said that, the administration has lots of priorities that they have to things that they have to prioritize to identify funding for, and so athletics may be something that is on their list, but it's not something that has risen to a board discussion.
Okay. There have been numerous articles posted in local news media as well as on social media with reference to discord within our athletic department related to sexual harassment, harsh and unwarranted criticism, and physical and psychological tactics that were used against the female coaches by the athletic director. While there have been reports of an investigation and removal of the tennis coach, many questions remain related to how this situation was handled. We would like to be provided with an update regarding the outcome of the investigation that was performed with regard to this matter, because no additional staff changes have occurred. We would like assurances that the appropriate individuals have been held accountable so that this situation does not occur again in the future.
Okay.
The question was regarding an update to the investigation.
I can't provide any update. I can share that there was an investigation. As you can imagine, all of these matters are personnel issues, and they're confidential. And if I knew, I couldn't share it anyway because of that issue, because of that confidentiality requirement. I can tell you, to the extent that changes were needed or needed to be made, if they were, they needed to be made, they were made. That's about as much as I can say on it.
And the next question about athletics is, what priorities are set with regard to expenditures for the athletic program? And they gave an example of spending $300 to $400K on the Jumbotron scoreboard for the current stadium, where attendance has been declining because of limited support to the football team. So the question is, how are expenditures done for the athletic program?
So again, you're asking me an administrative question, and I'm not an administrator, so I can't answer that.
Okay. Are there any fundraising requirements for members of the Board of Trustees? And if so, are they being met?
Fundraising in terms of, so the board, there is a annual giving expectation of all members of the Board of Trustees. All of the members of the Board of Trustees participate. We have 100% participation. We have board members that have more financial capacity than others. Those board members make larger financial contributions than some, but all make contributions and all participate in the financial expectation that they have. And it's a combination. Some do more because they have corporate resources that they can also tap in addition to their personal resources.
Okay. You may have touched on this in your opening statement. What do you see as our most pressing needs and weaknesses as an institution? I know you mentioned scholarships.
Scholarships, certainly scholarships for students. I mean, that's at the top of my list of things. And I also said, graduate student enrollment. That's another important attribute that we need to address. And I didn't mention faculty, but faculty research by faculty. That means that they can't, that we need to have the capacity for them to be able to do research. They can't, it's hard for them to do research if they are required to teach, 15 hours a semester. So grad students help in that regard, and other temporary faculty helps in that regard.
Okay. Did you mention what our annual operating budget is when you were speaking earlier?
No, I didn't ask. I mean, again, all of this is public information. There is nothing private about it. Our operating budget's roughly $90 million. That's when you exclude, if you include everything, I think it's 140, 150, but the operating budget's it's roughly 90 million, 90, and maybe 98 now. I used to know these numbers off the top of my head, but when I chaired audit committee, but without going and looking them up, I don't, it's somewhere in that area, in that neighborhood. It's between 90 and 98.
Okay. On the trustee giving, do they have a specific dollar amount that they are expected to meet?
So the target for trustees giving is the tuition of a student. That's how we set the target.
Okay. All right, it is almost 1:30. I think we got everything. I see a couple of things that you're probably going to say are administrative or personnel related. Are there any more questions that were given to Sabrina from the audience? And is it okay if we have more that we didn't ask that
Sure.
we can send them to you and you'll respond back and we can share them with the alumni? Yes. We announced as we were planning the event, if you had questions, just write them down. We would take them from you in the audience. Several people submitted theirs in advance when they got here. That means write it down and give it to us because we're doing a broadcast. So we're trying to make sure that we project a certain way. We're not limiting your questions, we just ask that they were submitted a certain way. Give me 1 second to look at the questions right here from the broadcast. I'm trying to not repeat things that I know you have already answered. And this is hard to read. I'll ask this anyway. Is there a particular reason there are no term limits for Board of Trustee members? Or is that just what's the way our bylaws are structured?
That's the way our bylaws are structured.
Okay. Is that it? I did ask him the questions. He made it very clear when I asked the question about the athletic director that that was a human resources issue and he could not address that. Yes, and most of that is related to something he's not going to answer today, as he's already told us. It's personnel related. Yes, he just told us he's aware of it, but he's not going to answer it because it's personnel, it's sensitive information. I mean, does it make focus on health and wellness. Globalization, studying abroad, engineering, agriculture. I guess this question is pertaining to specific programs in the university. Okay. This person wants to know, is their focus in the academics on health and wellness, globalization, engineering, and I did see one other question about the continuation of the artificial intelligence program that's currently being offered. Will that be continued?
Yes, so the provost and the faculty are going through, and the deans are going through, as part of the strategic planning process, a review of all the programs and identification of the things that are going to make, that are marketable, particularly marketable to help students to get jobs once they matriculate from the school. I mentioned it briefly. I probably didn't give it enough attention, and that is student career success. That's encompassing of a lot of things, but one of the more recent programs that we put in place is cybersecurity. These happen to be in an area that I'm intimately knowledgeable about because that's part of my day job. There are not enough, there are way more demand than there is supply. Lots of jobs available in that area. Lots of high-paying jobs that start out in the six-figure range that are available to students who leave school with those degrees, and there are not very many schools that offer the degrees. So that's part of it. Stackable credentials is another thing that the president had highlighted. Continuing education. There's a lot of areas focused around student success, study abroad programs, scholarship opportunities, grants, research grants. Those are things that we need to do a much better job identifying and making sure our students are prepared and can move into those roles.
Clarify on the appointment of the alumni rep who is serving on the search committee. I guess this person wants to know, I thought I heard you say that you asked them to appoint him. They want to know, I guess, why. I think we asked the question already. Are you appointing him or did you ask
No,
them?
I asked, yes, I appoint the person, but I asked Devin. This was more making sure that Devin, that the National Alumni Association was okay, I guess, if you will, with it. We needed somebody from the academy. I wanted somebody who was involved with the National Alumni Association, and then Dr. Briggs had served in a capacity as an alumni representative sitting in for Marshall. So he knew the operations of the university. It's better to have people who are knowledgeable than necessarily bringing in somebody who are not knowledgeable. I didn't feel that, I felt like that, again, the search committee is identifying candidates. It's the board that will ultimately vet and pick the president, and the two alumni association representatives are on the board and will be intimately involved in the deliberations.
Okay, thank you. It is about 1:35. We said we would be here for an hour and a half. I want to thank you for joining us today. I think he provided us with quite a bit of information, and if we find that there are some other questions that I want asked, we'll submit them to you. We appreciate your openness and frankness with us today, and we look forward to the continued relationship with you and the Atlanta alumni community.
Well, thank you for And I look forward to continuing to work together. And again, the Atlanta chapter, like a couple of other chapters, will be invited to participate in a listening session to help identify the characteristics that the search committee needs to use in identifying the semi-finalist candidates.
Great. Let's thank Mr. Morrison for that. Okay, I just have one announcement, and that is the deadline for submitting nominees to be honored at the Spirit of Greatness, which is in March. So you put that on your calendars now, save the date. That's the annual gala, which is a very prominent and important fundraiser. And that money, as Chairman Morrison alluded to, is very important because it's used for gap scholarship funding for our students. And I can tell you, as he said, you have no idea how many students are always trying to get a couple of $100 to stay in school. I get those calls, and I've had to learn that it's gone literally before the gala is over. That money is gone. So we really need to ask you to try and get ready now to participate in that. And it's actually a very nice event too. But alumni and other people from the community are recognized at that event, and we have shared the nominations forms. Alumni always have questions about how that's done. So I'm glad to see that it was shared this year, and we have been sharing that in our communications. If you hear and you haven't seen it, or you're not on our mailing list, make sure you register it today, and we will add you to our distribution so that you can continue to stay engaged. I want to thank all of